and welcome to or welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing the book The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. And the subtitle of this book is Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America. I didn't have another idea for a video today, so I just decided to do a nice book review. I haven't done a book review in so long, I feel like. And I have a lot of thoughts about this book, so I thought they could have their own video. Also, I think the light looks kind of weird back there. Maybe I should turn it off. Let's see if it looks better with it off. Ooh, now it actually looks quite haunting. I think we're going to stick with this for this video. I'm just testing out different lightings at this point. Let's actually turn on this so we have a little bit of light. Nah, that almost makes it worse. Anyway, also if you hear it raining outside, it is very, very rainy outside today. It's beautiful, but I had to drive my husband to work today because his windshield wipers are broken. Which means, obviously, you can't drive in the rain if your windshield wipers are broken. Don't you know how every video at this point I'm just like babbling on for the first couple minutes? That's fine. Let's get into this book. So this book is a nonfiction. Let me talk about the things I really liked about this book, and then I'll get to the criticisms I have for this book. And spoiler warning, I have very few criticisms. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Actually, I'm pretty sure I gave it 4.25 out of 5 stars, but on Goodreads, it's 4 out of 5 stars. Basically, this tells 2 stories. One is Burnham, H.P. Burnham, I believe, and he created the Chicago Fair of 1892, I believe. 1893. Good enough. So this is right after Jack the Ripper. The 1893 World Fair was going to be this magnificent, massive creation, and Burnham did basically everything to bring it to life. It was a reflection on the power and prestige of Chicago. Now, Chicago had been a big hub for manufacturing, and it was kind of the center of the U.S. It was the go-between between like the eastern states, New York City, Washington, D.C., stuff like that, as well as the western states, like the Old West, the railroads. This was a little bit after that time, but California, things like that. And so Chicago was kind of the hub in the middle of the country where so much went through, whether it was boats, whether it was railroads, but it was also very prominent that they were able to get the World Fair at Chicago. And so half the story talks about Burnham and him working to create this masterpiece of the World Fair, where people would come. And he spent millions of dollars, probably more equivalent in the modern day, but he spent a lot of money, and he hired the best architects, the best builders. There were quite a few tragedies where people died constructing all these like magnificent buildings. You know, he had people from around the world to show off. He had like a big Ferris wheel constructed. It was fancy. Now, the other side of this story is about H Holmes, the infamous serial killer. I think only about like 10 deaths, for sure, like maybe like 3 or 4 were tied to him so well that he could actually be convicted on those murders. But there's evidence that he killed up to like 30 plus people. Like, he was horrific, a sociopath. He basically wanted money and prestige. And so he would take out insurance under these people's names, murder them, and then collect the insurance. Of course, nobody knew that he murdered them. He would just say, oh, they vanished or they left, and I saw them this day and I have no idea where they went. But he also came to Chicago around the time of the World Fair, which is how these 2 stories connect. I absolutely loved Larson's writing. I really appreciate when nonfiction writers take the time to try to make history interesting, because there are so many scholarly historical works, many of which that I have to read for school, that are very bland and boring, and I really struggle to read them. They're not interesting. Whereas Larson, even when he's talking about the most boring things like architects getting together and talking about like mathematical and things that might be an issue with buildings they're constructing for the World Fair. Even those scenes, Larson makes interesting. Intrigue and dramatic language. It's just it's just absolutely brilliant, his writing. And even though I wasn't as big a fan of all the stuff with the World Fair and Burnham and all that drama that was going on, Larson's writing made me enjoy it more than I would have if anyone else had written it. Now, this is my first book by Erik Larson, so you'll have to let me know if you've read any other book by him. If he's good, if he's bad, if he's always like very captivating in his writing. But for me, his writing really made this book. It's also very historically accurate. Like he talks about, especially in his afterword, he talks about going to all these archives, finding these letters of these original people and putting together their life. So this is not a book that is, oh yeah, it's like half fiction, half nonfiction. And like he uses dramatizations and fake events to make it interesting. No, it really is. This is all very accurate, and he just writes in a way that is interesting and good. And I think a lot of historians back in the Victorian era, if you read very old history books, they did that. They sensationalized a lot of histories a lot, for better or for worse, because a lot of them were great writers, but they weren't really great historians. But with him, he's got both. He's got that scholarly research and information, but then he's also got this really interesting way of writing that keeps you engaged. So I love that balance, because I feel like a lot of people either do one or the other. They get really scholarly and understand the research, or they create an entertaining read. Now, another one that does this very well is Laura Hildebrand. I read her book Unbroken, and in that one, she was able to balance this historical detailed research with an entertaining read. So that's another book that is similar to Erik Larson. The main criticism I have with this book is, even though I enjoyed both stories pretty well, I definitely enjoyed H Holmes' story better because I just like true crime and learning about serial killers and trying to understand them from a psychological standpoint. However, the two stories didn't always blend together. Like there was a very little semblance of connections between the two. Besides them taking place at around the same time, around the same place, there's not that much in common. It would kind of be like writing a biography on a political figure in Washington, D.C., and also talking about like a grocer that happens to work in Washington, D.C. The two are technically connected because same time period, same place, but they could not be drastically different. Like, for example, Burnham and the World Fair was more like the backdrop for Holmes's murders. So it's not really as if they had a heavy connection. So that was my only criticism of this book, is without Larson's incredibly interesting writing, I don't think I would have enjoyed the aspects about Burnham and the World Fair. I just wouldn't have cared because I would have been more interested in H Holmes. And there were a few times early on in the book where I did find that happening, where I was like, oh no, don't leave Holmes. I want to learn more about his early life. And instead we switched over to the World Fair and I was like, oh, this is less than interesting. Now let's get to the H Holmes aspects, because I do really enjoy his story. Yeah, I guess it's nonfiction, so I don't mind as much giving spoilers, but I guess this is the light spoiler section. I enjoyed seeing Burnham's fall in a sense. The World Fair was successful and it did change a lot. Burnham never quite recovered from the physical and mental strain of creating this fair and a few other things that were going on. He had a close friend who passed away. And because of that, he died quite young. Holmes, he was finally arrested. This guy was a sociopathic liar. He had so many different wives. He engaged in bigamy quite a few times because he would find these young, impressionable girls and marry them. And I'm not sure if he ever murdered any of them specifically, but I know like one of their sisters he murdered, or a couple of the girls did go missing, but I'm not sure if he actually specifically married them. Basically, he would find these like progressively younger girls, because obviously he was getting older, and he would get their money, get their dowry, sometimes get their work. He ran a pharmacy shop for a while, and then he kind of sold it to this guy, and then he kind of murdered the guy. But the main reason he was caught was because there was this woman with 2 children, and he was technically supposed to be taking care of the children. Then the children went missing, and people were like, oh, clearly he killed them. And he was like, oh no, this other girl, she probably has them somewhere. And then they found out that she was dead. And he was like, oh, well, she probably murdered the kids before she died or something like that. And then they found the children's remains in a house that Holmes had rented. In this cellar. They had to dig them up, and they were like badly decomposed, pretty horrific stuff. And that was how they were able to tie any murder with him, to him, because his murder house, as it's known today, it doesn't exist anymore. I'm pretty sure it burned down. Basically, he had an incinerator. He had like different ways of disposing of bodies. And because of that, there was no evidence for the police to find, especially this is back in the late 1800s. They didn't have a lot of the forensic ability that they do nowadays. So he was able to get away with a lot more than he probably would have in the modern day. But so he ended up finally being arrested, and he was actually convicted of the 2 children's deaths for sure. I can't remember if he had more people that he was actually convicted of, because there were a lot of people accusing him of murdering people, but they couldn't fully tie a lot of murders to him. He ended up being executed about, I think, 4 years later after the World Fair, maybe 3 years. And he was in his 30s when he was executed. So this was a young guy who was very much a narcissist, very much a sociopath, and he was just an absolute liar all the time. He kept changing his story after the police got him. There's also, especially in the later section, it follows the detective who is trying to tie the crimes to him, as well as find him and be able to arrest him, because he went missing for a while. And the public was absolutely obsessed with this case as the detective was following Holmes. So there was so much intrigue when it came to Holmes's story that I absolutely love. Burnham's story with the World Fair, it was okay, it was interesting. And with Larson's writing, it just made it a lot more interesting, but I don't think that I would have enjoyed it as much if Larson's writing hadn't been so engaging. So my conclusions of this book: read it. I like it, especially if you struggle with nonfiction, find it really dry. I recommend this because it is not dry at all, especially for a nonfiction that is heavily scholarly. This is probably one of the best out there. It's definitely one of the best that I've read so far. So have you guys read this book? Have you read anything else by Larson? I'm curious to know your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe. I post every Saturday and Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time, and I will see you all in the next video. Have a great week. Bye.